All right, let's unpack this. Picture this for a moment. A colossal figure on stage, a true mass monster flexing under the lights. Now, imagine that same person speaking 7 languages fluently and holding a master's degree in political science.
Wow.
And this isn't even the whole picture, because this incredibly unique individual is remembered perhaps just as much for one specific, deeply felt loss that seemed to, well, shadow the rest of his life.
It's a fascinating image, isn't it? That blend of extreme physical development and significant intellectual achievement. And yes, that points us directly to the focus of this deep dive, Nasser El Sonbaty.
The man widely known as the Professor. Our goal today, drawing only from the stack of sources you've provided, articles, interviews, transcripts, is to get to the core of who Nasser El Sonbaty was.
Okay.
We're going to try and extract the most important insights, understand the controversies that marked his career, particularly the event in 1997 that he always called a robbery.
Right, the infamous one.
And trace the path his life took after that pivotal moment. All strictly within the bounds of the material we have here.
Yeah, the sources definitely paint a complex picture. You get this sense of, undeniable physical power, sure, and that intelligence.
That depth.
Exactly. But also this strong feeling he had of being wronged.
Yeah, perceived injustice, yeah.
And a personality that, well, wasn't afraid to push back. It's definitely not simple.
Well, let's start right there with what made him such an anomaly in the sport. What does the material tell us about his background?
Well, the sources establish he was born in 1965 in Stuttgart, Germany. His background itself was a mix. His father was Egyptian and his mother was Yugoslavian, so kind of international from the start.
And the material really emphasizes his intellect, right? That master's degree in political science, history, and sociology, plus fluency in 7 languages.
Yeah, 7.
That's where the professor nickname clearly comes from.
Absolutely, and that immediately sets him apart from the typical image people might have of professional bodybuilders.
Totally.
The sources describe him as someone who could be introverted, maybe even a bit mysterious at times, suggesting he was difficult to fully understand. He wasn't necessarily the open, charismatic figure you sometimes see in that world.
Which makes his entry into bodybuilding almost unbelievable based on the sources. They say he actually disliked it initially.
He did. It's quite surprising. The accounts mention he hated the look, the veins popping out, the incredibly strict and constant eating schedules.
Right.
He only started lifting weights at 17, weighing around 187 pounds, and even then it was purely to build leg strength for soccer. Soccer was his main thing.
Just for soccer legs. So how did someone who started lifting just for soccer and, well, hated bodybuilding end up becoming one of the sport's biggest names?
It seems like it was a gradual shift, according to the sources. He met a former weightlifter who kind of showed him some upper body exercises, to balance things out.
Right.
He started taking the training more seriously, moved to a proper gym. It was a transition over about 2 years, moving from disdain to developing a real passion for the training and the process as he saw the changes happening.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And the material notes something else interesting. He didn't really look up to the sport's legends as idols.
No, not really.
The sources specifically mention him not wanting to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, pointing out what he saw as Arnold's physical flaws, like weak legs, droopy shoulders, a wide waist.
Yeah, he was quite specific about that. He wanted his own look. And his father also had strong reservations about the sport.
Oh, really?
According to the sources, yeah. His father saw bodybuilding negatively, believing bodybuilders were unintelligent, narcissistic, and that pursuing it was just a waste of time and money. Plus concerns about, safety and injuries.
Despite that resistance, he competed. The sources detail his first contest back in 1985. He weighed 192 pounds and placed 6th.
Not bad for a start.
What's interesting is that even then, the judges apparently told him he had the best abs, which motivated him significantly. He would later claim he had the most symmetrical abs in the history of bodybuilding. Quite a claim.
Definitely bold. But those early results fueled him. He had several victories in junior competitions in the late 80s, which pushed him to train even harder.
Okay.
He finally earned his pro card in 1990, placing 8th at the IFBB Grand Prix in Helsinki.
But the start of his pro career wasn't smooth sailing, right? The sources describe him having a tough time for the first couple of years, not placing particularly well.
Yeah, it sounds like a struggle initially. He even set himself this, personal deadline If he didn't qualify for the Mr. Olympia contest by 1993, he was actually planning to quit the sport altogether.
Wow, really put the pressure on himself.
Totally. Fortunately for him, things turned around that year. In 93, he had multiple podium finishes in Europe, which gave his career the necessary momentum.
And that's when he moved.
Yeah, that prompted his move to California, the hub of professional bodybuilding at the time.
And according to the sources, 1994 really marked his breakthrough year.
It did. He placed a controversial second at the Night of Champions show, feeling strongly that he should have won. He recalled in the sources feeling like he was just seen as the unimportant guy from Europe at that time, kind of dismissed.
I can see that. He'd actually skipped the 1993 Olympia specifically to prepare for 1994.
Right. Good strategy, maybe.
When he finally debuted at the 1994 Mr. Olympia, he placed 7th. The sources note he wasn't yet the mass monster he'd become, describing his physique as still somewhat of a classicist.
Interesting description.
But he placed ahead of significant names, including Ronnie Coleman. That was also the year Dorian Yates won while dealing with a freshly torn bicep, which the sources also mentioned caused some controversy.
Yeah, that Yates win was talked about a lot, but Nasser's performance in 94 seemed to get Joe Weider's attention.
The big man himself.
Oh, exactly. The sources mentioned that Weider offered Nasser a full-time contract, which Nasser credited as allowing him to dedicate himself entirely to training and dieting without, financial worry.
That's huge for an athlete. And that support seems to have paid off quickly. The sources detail his successful run leading up to the 1995 Olympia.
Yeah, he was on a roll.
He won the Night of Champions and the Houston Pro Shows and had strong placings in 6 Grand Prix events, his lowest finish being 4th and his highest 2nd. He was competing much heavier too, around 270 pounds.
Definitely adding size. And there were some revealing anecdotes from the sources about this period that highlight his unique approach.
Like what?
Sean Ray, for instance, recounted seeing Nasser guest pose in the off-season at like 315 pounds. Huge.
Whoa.
And closer to a show, Ray mentioned seeing Nasser eat 3 pieces of cheesecake just 3 weeks out from competing.
No way. Cheesecake?
Yeah, only to then turn around and do like 2 or 3 hours of cardio in a single session the next day. Ray thought this was just incredible, as competitors typically wouldn't do more than an hour at a time.
That's intense. By the 1995 Mr. Olympia, he was clearly a major threat, placing 3rd and matching Dorian Yates in size and weight.
Yep, right up there.
This is also around the time, according to the sources, that his perspective on the sport's judging began to shift significantly.
Yes. As he rose to the top, the material indicates Nasser developed a really critical view of professional bodybuilding judging.
How so?
He apparently felt there were inconsistencies and believed he was sometimes unfairly judged by what he saw as corrupt or incompetent officials.
Strong words.
Yeah. The sources convey his conviction that some major contests were, in fact, rigged. Straight up rigged.
That feeling seems to have intensified with the events of 1996. The sources describe him bringing his best physique ever to the Olympia that year, 10 pounds heavier and in better condition.
Looks amazing, apparently.
But he again placed 3rd.
Right. And then, about a month later, he was disqualified after failing a diuretic test. These tests had just been introduced that year.
Ouch. Did he deny it?
No, he admitted taking a diuretic, reportedly told someone he gambled and lost, and that he couldn't even cry about it because the diuretic prevented him from doing so. Weird detail.
The sources highlight that there was controversy around the testing itself, though.
There was. One judge is quoted suggesting they only tested for diuretics because they were considered the substance most immediately dangerous to a competitor's health.
Okay, so safety concern maybe.
Right. But Nasser had serious doubts about the whole process. He claimed in the sources that he never actually saw his positive test result.
Really?
Yeah. And he found it suspicious that he was the only competitor caught. He suspected others might have used different types of diuretics that weren't being tested for, or maybe that collected results weren't actually being sent in for analysis across the board. Kind of fishy, he thought.
I see. He also made a striking claim comparing his situation to Jay Cutler's, right? Cutler got caught for diuretics later but wasn't disqualified.
Exactly. Nasser attributed this difference to Cutler having a different name, background, and being less outspoken than himself. Basically, connections and playing the game better, maybe.
Interesting theory.
And he went further, alleging that the IFBB eventually stopped testing for substances like cocaine and Nuane because, in his view, too many pros were using them, and the federation didn't want to risk like 40 or 50% of their athletes testing positive.
Wow, that's a heavy accusation.
It is, but it's fascinating that According to the sources, despite this high-profile disqualification in 1996, his popularity actually seemed to increase.
Strange how that works sometimes.
Yeah. He also continued to have success in various Grand Prix contests after the Olympia. But all of this seems to have set the stage for the pivotal moment that would define his legacy for many, the 1997 Mr. Olympia.
Okay, the big one. This was the year everyone was focused on Dorian Yates, who was aiming for his 6th straight win.
Yep, 6th title on the line. But the sources detail that Dorian was severely hampered by injuries.
What kind of injuries?
Triceps tendonitis throughout the year, and what was nearly a 100% tear of his triceps tendon just 3 weeks before the show, like completely torn almost.
3 weeks out. That's brutal.
Totally. He was reportedly unable to train properly or even hold certain poses effectively. Plus, Flex Wheeler, another top contender, also withdrew, so the field was a bit different.
And the sources are quite direct about Dorian's condition on stage that night.
Oh, yeah. Descriptions range from him looking his worst, having a heavy midsection, and his arm being literally non-existent due to the bicep and triceps tears.
Non-existent.
Yeah. His proportions and symmetry were described as awful, with some accounts even mentioning visible black and blue mark, just not looking like the dominant Dorian.
Okay, so set that against Nasser. How did he look, according to the sources?
In stark contrast, the sources portray Nasser at 32 years old and weighing 280 pounds as being in peak condition. Absolutely nailed it.
So no injuries, sharp.
No injuries, looked sharp and detailed. His face was drawn in, indicating extreme leanness. The sources specifically highlight his phenomenal detailed legs, noting that from the side, they appeared twice the size of Dorian's.
Twice the size?
Yeah, and that Nasser had full leg biceps where Dorian lacked them. He had the size, the weight, the height to challenge, and seemingly much better aesthetics on that particular night.
Which brings us to the heart of what many, according to these sources, viewed as a major injustice.
Exactly. The widespread belief among fans, and reportedly some competitors and even judges, was that Nasser El Sonbaty should have won that night. Period.
There are direct quotes in the material calling it a major injustice and stating he simply beat Dorian Yates. Flat out beat him.
Right. Now, Dorian's counterargument, presented in the sources, is that a contest is judged on all 11 compulsory poses.
Okay, fair point.
He maintained that his injury significantly impacted only one pose, the front double bicep, and that he believed he won the majority of the other poses, pointing to strengths in areas like the front lat spread and back double biceps.
So he felt he won on points across the board, despite the obvious injury.
That was his perspective, yeah. But Nasser's reaction to the outcome, according to the sources, was one of deep and lasting bitterness. Just couldn't accept it.
You can imagine.
He couldn't believe Yates won, despite, in Nasser's words, looking pregnant due to his distended midsection. Nasser labeled the result a completely staged outcome and called it the biggest bodybuilding robbery of the 20th century, orchestrated by a clique of judges.
Wow, biggest robbery of the 20th century. He didn't mince words.
Not at all. He felt it was a made-up story, designed to silence him, and reportedly cried in his hotel room afterward, feeling completely wronged and robbed, just devastated.
So what were the theories? Why didn't he win if so many felt he should have? The sources must explore that.
They do. Several theories are presented. His personality was seen as perhaps unmarketable, and maybe his non-US background played a role, you know?
The foreigner angle.
It could be. There was speculation that judges might not have wanted Dorian Yates to retire immediately after the contest with a loss, especially given his injury struggles, kind of letting the champ go out on top.
A legacy decision, maybe?
Possibly. Another theory suggested there was a reluctance to have another non-US winner, maybe highlighting perceived US inferiority in the sport at that time.
Politics, basically.
Seems like it.
Right.
And Nasser himself believed, not being an NPC athlete, you know, the amateur organization often seen as a pipeline to the IFBB pro ranks was a factor.
Not coming up through the right system.
That was his feeling. He also felt he didn't engage in the kind of networking, like inviting people to his home or making specific phone calls that he saw other competitors doing. He wasn't playing the political game, maybe.
And there were some backstage things too, right? Adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah, adding to the controversy are accounts of backstage incidents mentioned in the sources. There's a claim that head judge Steve Weinberger was at Dorian Yates' residence a week before the show, reportedly knowing about the severity of Yates' injury.
That looks potentially problematic.
And Sean Ray also claimed he saw Weinberger and Yates sequestered backstage at the show itself, suggesting maybe an unfair advantage in communication or access, you know, whispers behind closed doors.
The sources portray 1997 as an undeniable turning point then. It was Dorian Yates's last Olympia.
Yep, he retired after that.
And it seemed to be Nasser's last real shot, his last realistic opportunity to capture that ultimate title.
It really felt that way. He reportedly had high hopes for the 1998 Olympia, believing he could win. However, the sources also suggest that internally he had a bad feeling.
Oh.
A sense that regardless of his condition, he wouldn't be allowed to win, seeing it as a political decision. When Dorian retired, Nasser seemed to feel his own time at the very, very top had essentially passed with him.
Like his window had closed. And his placings after 1997 show a noticeable decline, don't they?
They do. He was second at the 1998 Arnold Classic and third at the 1998 Olympia, which are still, elite placings.
Absolutely. Top tier.
But then he rapidly dropped down the ranks 6th, 5th, 9th, and eventually placing outside the top 10. A definite slide.
During this period, the sources mention accusations of synthol use, particularly in his deltoids.
Yeah, that comes up. And a hospitalization for an infection in that area, which he reportedly attributed to a staph infection. Sean Ray claimed he saw Nasser using injectables in his shoulders years earlier, back in 1996. So the rumors were there.
How did Nasser view synthol? Was he defensive about it?
Actually, he was quite candid about synthol use in the sport. He's quoted in the sources saying it was as common as using a toothpaste.
Wow.
And used by 95% of athletes, amateur and pro, even claiming judges who had cosmetic enhancements were using similar substances. He basically said everyone was doing it.
There's a somewhat sad detail from the sources about the later part of his career and post-competition life. He apparently sold used gym clothes, underwear, and posing trunks online.
Yeah, that's mentioned. Acknowledging it was unusual, but noting people have different taste. Maybe just trying to connect with fans or make some money. Hard to say.
That bitterness over 1997 seems to have remained a constant, though, reading through this.
Absolutely. He estimated he was robbed for at least $5 million US in lost endorsements and opportunities directly tied to potentially winning the Olympia title.
$5 million, that's specific.
Yeah. He stated that his lost trust was beyond possible repair, just completely broken.
The sources draw parallels between his reaction to the 1997 defeat and how Mike Menser and Burl Fox reportedly struggled to cope with their own significant losses in major competitions.
Right. The suggestion is that he just couldn't digest the gravity of that perceived injustice and the resulting disappointment, and that kind of contributed to his decline in placings. Couldn't move past it.
His motivation apparently plummeted significantly after 1999 when he came to the realization he would likely never win the Olympia title.
Yeah, the drive seemed to fade.
A staph infection injury in 2003 led to another hospitalization. After that, his goal became simply getting back into shape and proving he could still look good, though he felt he never quite matched his previous condition.
Right. The sources capture him questioning the immense effort involved, wondering how many more years he should run against the wall and how much more chicken breast he should eat. Just questioning the whole sacrifice.
You can feel the weariness there. And after stepping away from competing, the sources note he became even more outspoken.
Oh yeah, even more so. He didn't hold back, often naming specific individuals like Milo Sarshev, Sean Ray, Paul Dillett, Greg Kovacs, and Dave Palumbo, offering really sharp criticisms and often using pretty unflattering nicknames.
Settling scores, maybe? And tragically, the material suggests he carried that bitterness with him throughout the remainder of his life, right up until his death.
It seems so. His life did end prematurely. The sources discuss speculation around his steroid use, with some references to what was termed a death cycle, and mentions of high dosages.
How high are we talking?
Well, one account in the sources referred to potential dosages like 1,500 milligrams of so-called anabolic steroids plus pills per week, and even claims of 5,000 milligrams of testosterone per week at times. Huge amounts, if true.
Good grief. And the health issues were showing up.
Yeah, the sources report he experienced rising kidney creatine levels, possibly reaching 2.1, which, while not yet outright kidney failure, was a clear indicator of declining kidney function. Kidneys were struggling.
In his final months, he was reportedly staying in Cairo to be with his father, who was ill.
That's right. But the sources reveal that during this time, Nasser himself faced a major health crisis. He needed a heart transplant, but tragically did not qualify as a candidate for one.
Oh, man. So he couldn't get the help he needed.
Apparently not. Nasser El Sonbaty died in his sleep at the age of 47 in 2013. The cause is reported as kidney and heart failure. Just 47.
So young.
Incredibly young. Looking back through the sources, it's poignant to consider his self-description. He saw himself as self-motivated in what he called a lonely sport.
Yeah.
Driven by a desire to be world-class and doing it primarily for the love of the process, not just money. Yet he also faced incredibly high expectations, both internally and externally. He's quoted saying, "People have so high expectations, I tell them stories, but there is no story to tell. It's always the same." A complicated end to a very complicated story.
So, reflecting on this deep dive into the sources on Nasser El Sonbaty, we've traced the journey of this incredibly unique individual. He went from being an academic outsider who initially disliked bodybuilding to becoming a top contender who pushed the boundaries of physical size.
A remarkable rise.
His career was marked by undeniable achievement and that intellectual depth, but as the sources show, it was heavily shaped by controversy, culminating in the intensely disputed outcome of the 1997 Olympia.
That flashpoint.
This seems to have been a catalyst for the subsequent decline in his career and his enduring bitterness, leading to a tragic premature death at just 47.
Yeah, the material really lays bare that central tension in his life, his undeniable physical prowess and keen intelligence, seemingly clashing with the subjective nature of judging in his sport, and the political undercurrents that he absolutely felt were at play. The 1997 result, whether you view it as a legitimate judging decision or, as Nasser adamantly claimed, a robbery, clearly served as a breaking point that profoundly impacted the rest of his life's trajectory.
In considering everything we've explored from these sources, it really leaves you with some powerful questions, doesn't it?
It really does.
Based on the accounts we've read, what is the true physical and perhaps even psychological cost of pursuing such an extreme level of physical perfection?
Yeah, what's the toll?
To what extent do personality, background, and the politics behind the scenes genuinely influence outcomes in competitive sports, particularly those judged subjectively like bodybuilding?
How much does that stuff really matter?
And how does a deeply felt sense of perceived injustice, especially at the pinnacle of one's profession, impact a person's entire life path? How does it change you?
Thinking about the high stakes, the inherent subjectivity in judging physiques, the significant health risks that the sources hint at being involved in the pursuit of extreme size.
Definitely hinted at.
And then pairing that with Nasser's very distinct, unyielding, and outspoken personality, the sources really make you consider. Was Nasser El Sonbaty's tragic arc primarily a unique personal struggle to cope with the realities of elite competition, or was it also, at least in part, a reflection of deeper, perhaps unavoidable challenges and complexities baked into the very world of elite professional bodybuilding itself?
Something to really think about.